Hello, welcome to Football Geeks. This week we'll be chatting to author Dan Williamson about his brand new book, Phenomenon, the story of Brazilian forward, the legendary Ronaldo, his origins and his progression to his position as the finest centre forward of his generation and arguably all time. Dan, hello, how are you, sir?
Hi, Phil. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome, mate. I mean, we've got quite a lot of ground to cover because it's a big story, isn't it? And I've read the book. I got my promo from Pitch. They sent it over, and you've done a fantastic job, mate. It's a really great story that's well told. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
No, you're well. Honestly, I've really enjoyed reading it. But first things first, I mean, it's the most mundane question. I always ask the mundane question first because it's the most obvious one. So where does your love of Ronaldo stem from?
Just being a football fan, and it was sort of obviously in the mid-90s when he came to popular sort of consciousness really in Europe. I was born in '83, so sort of I was like 13, 14 when he kind of hit the big time over in Europe. Very impressionable. Followed Man United as a boy, sort of first love, and England to a lesser extent. A couple of England heroes like Gazza from Italia '90, but then there wasn't really a lot else until Euro '96. So my main football heroes were United players really, and then obviously in the mid '90s, football started becoming a bit more global, what we could see on the telly, and especially when Ronaldo joined Barca in '96, and it was on Sky Sports started showing La Liga as well. So I really started to watch his games regularly. I'd seen him before, obviously, like a couple of he played for Brazil in the Umbro Cup, if you remember that, in '95 against England at Wembley. And a few other bits and bobs that you might catch, but there wasn't really a lot of football on, sort of international football and foreign football on TV at that time until '96 really, when he went to Spain. So started following him in Spain. I had the Barcelona shirt, the long sleeved Kappa one, which I think is just absolute beauty of a shirt. So I had one of those and I played in it until it was basically ready to fall apart. And then in '97 he joins Inter Milan, and again, I bought the shirt from that, the Umbro one. Again, love that shirt. And we were able to obviously watch him there on Gazzetta Football Italia. So, Saturday morning highlight show, which most people listening to this will probably have fond memories of. And then obviously the games on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday evening. So I was able to really watch him in those 2 seasons really close up. And then obviously came the World Cup, which is on terrestrial TV. And that was supposed to be his tournament. And obviously up until the final, it probably was. He had a good tournament, and he was scoring goals up until then. So that was kind of the period that really solidified my my sort of love for him as an impressionable young football fan.
Yeah. I mean, we'll touch on those in more detail in a short while, mate, because he's certainly a player with an incredible inventory of ability, wasn't he? I mean, I was watching in preparation for tonight, watching like 30 goals that he scored, and it seems like every ball through the middle, his ability to kind of out-muscle centre halves. If it was 50-50, there was only ever going to be one winner, and then you've got the incredible kind of technical and creative ability, but all done at amazing high speed. He's just so quick off the block. But let's go right back to his his initial kind of professional days, because he came from, was it San Cristobal that he came from?
São Cristobal, yeah. So he started off playing futsal like most Brazilians do, and funnily enough, when his first ever game, he was stuck in net, and he ended up coming outfield and scoring a load of goals, and I think it was something like 166 goals in a couple of seasons he scored playing futsal. And then he ended up at São Cristobal, who was like his first club where he played 11-a-side football on the grass pitches. And they're quite a modest club, it's a sort of local club really. But, it gave him that introduction to 11-a-side football. And as we see sort of throughout most of his career, like every kind of step he took, he seemed to conquer, played futsal, conquered it, played for São Cristobal, conquered it, started becoming on the radar of the sort of underage Brazilian national team as well. And then in '93 it was when he signed for Cruzeiro, who are one of the big clubs in Brazil. And again, he just he just sort of took to it like a duck to water. It was a bit of a change for him because he had to move to another city. I think it's about 400 kilometers away from Rio where he moved to. So he had to sort of, and he's only 17 at this time, 16, 17, has to grow up a bit. But again, he just takes to it like a duck to water, scored 44 in 47 for them, and won a couple of titles with them. So they won the Brazilian Cup, they won the state championship, which not probably to a lesser extent now, but was back in the day, it was quite big in Brazil if you were the best team in your state. I mean, most states have got 3 or 4 decent teams, and then the rest of them are sort of semi-pro and amateur teams. But to win it and to beat your big rivals in the final was always quite a big thing. So he won those 2 trophies, and there's some memorable moments as well. He scored a memorable goal against Boca Juniors in the Copa Libertadores, and that's quite a good goal to watch. To watch him sort of run through a team like that, and then another game where he scored 5 goals in a game as well, which is quite famous. So he had some really good moments, and like I say, he was getting involved with the Brazilian youth setup as well, and then so that's sort of how it all came about in Brazil, and then obviously the next step is Europe, and he just continues to soar from there.
Yeah. I mean, for a 17-year-old to score like 44 goals in the, incredible technical ability of the kind of Campeonato, and the blood and thunder that goes with it, because it's a very kind of tough game over there for a young boy to come through and then do that, and of course that earmarked him for Pereira's '94 World Cup squad, didn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, going back to just what you said then, like the game against Boca Juniors, that it was in the home leg that he scored the famous goal, but in the away leg, he got the shit kicked out of him, as a young kid and at that time a skinny kid as well. He showed he had the character, and again, going back to sort of what you said at the start, he's strong. You can't really outmuscle him, you can't outrun him. He's got all the physical attributes you need to be a top player, but he's also got the technical gift as well. So, he's got sort of balletic feet, but he's got the brute as well. So he kind of had everything. And I always say he's like the one of the first sort of modern forwards. Like you've got these forwards now who can play anywhere across the front line. And I imagine him now, like if he played in this modern era, he could easily play centre forward, right, left, in a front 3. And I think he could do it all, because he used to go wide left, wide right. He'd go high, he'd drop to the halfway line to get the ball, and basically the whole of the opposition half was like his domain, really. So I think he was the complete forward. But yeah, going back to the and then obviously he ends up in the USA '94 squad. Doesn't play a single minute in the tournament, but he described it as the Ivy League of football. It was a bit cheesy and a bit contrived, but he's watching Romario, who I love Romario as a kid as well. I think he was, I think one of the best sort of out and out strikers of his generation, and probably a different kind of striker to Ronaldo, like more of a penalty box predator. But for him to watch Romario and Bebeto and be part of that squad, lifting the World Cup, is he said he learned a lot, even though he didn't play a single minute. He learned a lot from it, and it inspired him as well to be, next time round, I want to be the main man. Funny story as well that I found out from the USA '94. They all were allowed a $500 allowance for goods to bring back. It must have been some sort of customs thing. And Ronaldo was the only player in the squad who stuck to his $500 limit. So he's obviously sort of, being the sort of good young boy who doesn't want to step out of line. But a lot of the players brought back like thousands and thousands of dollars. Apparently one of them brought back a whole kitchen in a shipping container, and they got it back to Brazilian customs, and the Brazilian customs were like, what are you doing? You can't do this. And there was like a big row, and in the end it got quashed, and they were allowed to sort of come in with all the stuff that they'd got from the States. Because obviously, I think it was probably around that time where going to the States, they probably had more advanced stuff, and probably at a good price as well. So yeah, that was the World Cup. And then, he's sort of on the way. He's not a fully fledged international yet, but he's kind of on the way. And then he ends up at PSV. And again, moving over to Europe, it's that whole thing, will they adapt? And I think he had trouble adapting at first. His mum ended up coming over to live with him as well. And but again, he just absolutely smashed it. And he got 54 and 58 across 2 seasons. So he's like, and I think he's amazing as well, because I remember I don't know what your sort of memories are of that era, but I always remember in the 90s just always having in my head this thing that if your striker can get 1 goal in 2 games, so if they played 50 games and they got 25 goals in a season, that's a pretty good return.
Yeah.
And I mean, Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo have obviously like blurred that now, and the top teams are sort of more dominant than they probably were. But so it's not really a big thing now. But if you go back to the sort of 90s, what he's doing is pretty much like what Messi and Ronaldo are doing. He's scoring pretty much 1 goal a game, and it's incredible, really. As a 17-year-old kid coming over from, so he's not even 18 when he signs for PSV, and he just cracks on. He just continues scoring goals. So yeah, it's pretty incredible, really, the rise.
Yeah. I mean, he did break boundaries in that respect, because, as you say, there was this preconception that 1 in 2 was the kind of average that a striker could be looking for, and he's just smashing it. But when he came over for PSV, it was, I mean, he learned lots of tricks off Ronaldo. If you look at I loved the Romario toe poke.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, where he's one-on-one, the keeper can't set himself because the ball's already gone, and it's the keeper's looking for some sort of curve or some sort of trick, and it's just bang, there you go, have that 1-0. Yeah, and then sorry, carry on, Dad. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I think that's one of those things they learn from futsal. And I always remember as a kid, when you're playing football, if you toe poke it, all your mates are absolutely fuming, like, oh, you toe poke it, like, it almost like it was a sort of dirty thing, to toe poke it. When actually, if you can use your kind of, any kind of trick to get one over on the goalkeeper, then why wouldn't you do it? But yeah, Romario was actually, quite instrumental in him signing for PSV, because Romario had obviously played for PSV for 5 years. He left the year before Ronaldo came, and he'd gone to Barcelona. So Romario recommended PSV and said, it was a well-run club, a family club, a big club, but not like massively in the spotlight. So he said it was a great place for him to go. So he partly took Romario's advice to go to PSV, and then when he left PSV, he kind of followed Romario's path and went to Barcelona. So yeah, Romario was obviously a bit an idol of Ronaldo's when he was growing up.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, as you say, he moved on to Barcelona. He didn't start particularly well at PSV. They had like 2 managers in the first couple of months of him being there, didn't they? And then I think, was it Dick Advocaat who came in and they settled, and they didn't win the league, but he showed himself to be, a player of immense potential during that period of time.
Yeah, so he had a couple of managers, and he actually fell out with Dick Advocaat in the end, and that was, whether he would have left anyway, he probably would have, but one of the ways that he kind of, him or his advisors, should we say, almost engineered the move out of PSV was because he'd fallen out with Dick Advocaat. So Ronaldo missed a lot of the second season. I mean, he still scored 54 goals in 2 seasons, but he missed a lot of the second season when he started to get knee trouble. So he started to just be having not something that really required an operation or anything, but it was more based on fatigue and growing pains, and he missed a lot of games. So he came back just a couple of weeks before the end of the season, and he was desperate to get in the squad for the Olympics in Atlanta for Brazil. And so he thought, right, I'll play the last few games, I'll score a few goals, and then I'll be in the squad. He was in the squad ultimately, but the reason why he fell out with Advocaat is because he thought that he was going to be left out of the squad. It came the Dutch Cup final, and the Brazilian assessors came to watch that game, and he was on the bench. So he was absolutely livid with Dick Advocaat, and he got on in the end. They won, so he got another trophy, and he went to the Olympics in the end. So all was good, but I think he felt betrayed. I mean, really, when you look back at it, they won the cup. So as a manager, you kind of justified in your decision, and he had been out. He'd been missing loads of games. He'd only played a couple of games after being out for the best part of 6 months. So he's probably been a bit of a prima donna there, if we're being honest. Yeah. And but anyway, it was, like I say, it's was that the reason he left PSV, or was he going to go anyway? Because after a couple of years, he'd proven that he'd outgrow. Even at his age that he was, not even 20 yet, he'd proven that he'd kind of outgrown that level, and again looking for another challenge. And and his advisors looking for another way to sort of milk the cow, should we say?
Yeah. and it was the start of that spate of injuries that kind of drew his. Well, we'll come back to that later, but he was I wouldn't say he was injury prone. He was just very unlucky, wasn't he? It was just it's an unlucky player. If you can look at a player who's won that amount of kind of prizes and personal honours as an unfulfilled kind of career, which obviously you can't. But to think that that there could have been more had he kind of not sustained the kind of injuries that he did. So anyway, we'll move on. So he's now 20 years of age. And he joins Barcelona for a world record fee. Was it around like
20 million? Yeah,
20 million.
Yeah. So yeah, and then obviously we'll jump forward in a bit. But when he joins Inter, he breaks the world record again. So he basically So I think the Barcelona one was $20 million because I think if I'm right in remembering that Shearer went to Newcastle and that was 15 million quid, but it was more in dollars. So anyway, effectively, Shearer broke his world record, not long after. And so he goes to Barcelona, and again, he just takes to it like a duck to water. He got 47 goals in one season, ridiculous. And Bobby Robson was the manager, and it was a weird time though because Barcelona were in a bit of a sorry state, really. So you had the Cruyff dream team a couple of years before, and then obviously fast forward a few years, you had the sort of revival with Joan Laporta as the president, and Rijkaard and Cruyff. But Ronaldo's spell was kind of caught in the middle of it, and there was a lot of upheaval, really, because Cruyff had gone. They'd sacked him after a couple of trophyless seasons, and there was a real kind of bitterness around the club. Some people obviously thought that Cruyff was untouchable, based on what he'd done as a player and as a manager. And then, other people were more of, on the other side, and there was a real bitter divide. So Ronaldo comes into this team, and, how much of that he would have known or picked up on, I don't know, but he takes to it like a duck to water. But it was just a difficult year, and, Bobby Robson was the manager, but he was kind of almost like a sort of, dead man walking, if you like. I mean, they had a good season. They won the Spanish Super Cup, so they won the Copa del Rey. They won the Cup Winners' Cup. So I mean, to most clubs in most seasons, that would be pretty memorable campaign. But Barcelona at that time, I think it was just a shambles the way it was run. Bobby Robson ends up kind of getting eased upstairs, if you like. Louis van Gaal comes in as the manager, and Bobby Robson ends up becoming I can't remember what his exact job title was, but it was something like chief of scouting. So he just basically spends a year living on the Mediterranean, just watching football matches, and just that's it, really. It's just a bit of a doss for him. But I think he was hurt by it, the fact that he was kind of moved upstairs, if you like. So it was a bit of upheaval. And the other thing that happened to him during his Barcelona year was that he, quite soon into the contract, both parties realised that they'd undersold themselves. So his people had thought to themselves, you know what, he should be getting paid more here. He signed an 8-year contract, but they were like, we didn't get enough wages for him, so they want more wages. And the club are actually quite keen to renegotiate because they put a release clause in for him, which was too low in their mind. So both sides had a vested interest, really. So Barcelona wanted the protection of him having like a bigger release clause, so no one would come in and buy him, and his advisors wanted him to have bigger wages. So that's why they started negotiating. But it went on pretty much all season, and it was just a bit of a unfortunate background distraction all the way through the season that became a bit of a sideshow in the end. And then obviously they got to the end of the season when they thought they'd agreed something where they wanted to double the release clause, and they wanted to double his wages, and everything seemed agreed. But then it all kicked off, and the next thing you know, Inter come in and pay the release clause, and off he goes to the San Siro. But yeah, I mean, that's the season where I really kind of fell in love with him as a player. There's one particular goal against Compostela, and all that stuff we talked about before, like all of his qualities, he displays all of those qualities in one goal. And even Bobby Robson was like, you know, hands on his head in the dugout area, completely like, you know, gobsmacked by what he'd seen. And, you know, he'd seen a lot by then. That, you know, I mean, I think he was 67 at that point. You know, he'd seen everything, but he was like, oh my God, like, what have I just watched? And that's just how good he was. And, you know, even as a kid, he's still a kid at this point. And yeah, so I think it's a real, you know, what could have been at Barca had it been a bit more of a stable time and had he stayed longer. But yeah, it was quite short but sweet. And I think, obviously, you know, looking ahead to when he joins Real Madrid, but you know, Barcelona fans probably don't have the relationship with him that they should have had, or that they would maybe have liked, because it ended on a bit of a sour note, really. And the other thing that happened when he was at Barcelona is that they lost the league, so they were, as well as what they won, they were right in the hunt for the league up until a few games to go. And I don't know if you remember Le Tournoi that England played in.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
It was a bit of a weird. I mean, it was quite cool. I mean, England won. It was the first trophy, if you like, since.
It looked like a little silver square, didn't it? It was a garbage trophy.
I was listening to Alan Shearer on a podcast the other day, and he was sort of like joking that, you know, he lifted the only trophy, the first trophy since Bobby Moore. But if you look at the pictures, he looks almost embarrassed, because it's like a friendly tournament. But what happened was that it wasn't a FIFA tournament. It was more like a warm up for France for the World Cup the following year. Mm. So technically, you didn't have to release your players, but in the end, FIFA. So in Ronaldo's case, I mean, there was a lot of strong players there. So, but in the Spanish football case, the season was still going, because I think it was the first week of June, or might have even been later in June, actually. And most other leagues had finished, but the Spanish league was still going. And Barca were like, we don't want to release our best player in the middle of a title race. Anyway, in the end, FIFA sort of insisted. So they lost Ronaldo, and they lost a game at home that they should have won. And you know, I think Ronaldo got a bit of stick for that. Again, if he'd been playing, who knows whether they'd won? It's impossible to say, isn't it? But it just seemed to be that there's one distraction after the other when he was at Barca, and he was flying back and forth to Rio all the time. You know, he wasn't really living the lifestyle of a top athlete. I think he just got away with it because he was young, but because he was so technically gifted as well. So yeah. I don't think Barcelona fans have got like a massively. I mean, maybe with time they'll probably look back and think, "Wow, you know, what a season he had," and it was with us. But I think, yeah, I don't think they had the best relationship with him for a few years anyway. Put it that way.
No, I think Z Roberto said that it takes Ronaldo 2 days to do what we do in 10. So he evidently he's kind of his recovery time and his ability to kind of like integrate himself was a lot more kind of attuned to it than the rest of his team.
Well, he needed that, because his recovery time, because there was one period when he was at Barca. It's something like 9 flights back and forth to Rio in 2 weeks, or not 2 weeks. I think it was a month. Sorry, I was exaggerating there a bit, but there was times where he'd fly back to Rio, and then the next day he'd fly back, and then he'd play a game or something, and then he'd fly back, and there'd always be an excuse or something, or you know, and you know, he was a young kid and he was maybe homesick, but I think there was a lot of partying going on. And I think in the end that was another thing that started to wind people up. Giovanni, who was Brazilian and played for Barcelona at the time as well, he sort of said in the end, like, you know, I want to go back for Carnival as well, but you know, I'm a professional footballer, so you know, sometimes you have to make sacrifices, and Ronaldo just wasn't really prepared to do it. And I think his advisors probably encouraged it, or didn't you know, advise him otherwise.
But I'll tell you what, man, that's probably why we're here talking about Ronaldo and not Giovanni now.
Well, yeah,
because we love that in players, don't we? Players,
yeah, absolutely. I think
edge.
Yeah, I think that is funny, because you know, answering questions for people like, why did you want to write the book and stuff, and you know, you look at, I mean, I love Messi. I think Messi's probably the greatest player of all time, and he's got an incredible career, and Cristiano Ronaldo's career has been incredible as well. But I think what I like about Ronaldo, he's like it's the rise and fall narrative, and it's also the fact that he is a bit he isn't just a perfect specimen like Cristiano Ronaldo. Really, like his physical regime is just like he's just a machine, isn't he? He's like whereas Ronaldo's sort of he's got that. He doesn't like training. He doesn't really train very well. He likes eating fast food and drinking beer, and he likes women. Sounds pretty good to be fair. But yeah, and obviously he had injuries and stuff, and it was, he wasn't just the sort of perfect specimen of everything about him was perfect. He had a bit, like you say, he had a bit of, just a bit, he had that infectious smile. He wasn't just a robot, and yeah, I think that is why people warm to people like that, because they're a flawed genius, if you like.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a journalist, he still had that like incredible, regardless of a lack of fitness or perceived lack of fitness, he still had that incredible pace and movement and the finishing ability. There was a journalist who said, I think they said he played every attack like he had a 10-second deadline. So the ball, I've got to score in 10 seconds, and then he'd be off and he'd do something incredible.
But do you know what was amazing about him? And again, I'm jumping forward a bit so we can obviously jump back. But when he does have all the injuries and goes to Real Madrid and when he wins the World Cup in 2002, he's a different player. He's not the sort of bulldozing all throughout the opposition half. He is a bit more of a sort of 18-yard box striker. He does play higher up, and he's a bit more of a penalty box player. Obviously he does move around, but he's less mobile, but he's still scoring goals. It's like this is the bad version of him. And he's at Real Madrid, he scores 30 goals, I think, in the first 3 seasons, in each of the first 3 seasons. And this is a Ronaldo who's supposedly overweight now, past his best, loads of injuries, not got any motivation because he's always partying and stuff. And he's still scoring 30 goals in La Liga. Like, it's unbelievable. And then later on when he goes to Brazil and he's like, not far off knocking it on the head. There's one goal he scores where he's like chips the keeper in a big game, and it's like he's still miles better than everyone else, even though he's like a complete shadow of his sort of 20-year-old self. Because really, you could argue that 98 before the World Cup final, he peaks really at the age of God, what is he then? 22, so 21, 22. So. But he was able to reinvent himself and still be world class, which is pretty good.
Yeah. I think Rob Smith, who's a really good journalist, he echoed what you said. He said there were 2 Ronaldos. The one that returned in 2002 after a long-term injury was a great goal scorer, but the 1990s version was a great everything.
Yeah,
that was his quote. And it's quite true, isn't it? So, but let's move on, because he went to Inter, didn't he? And there was, I don't know why, but there's still this skepticism. It's just like, oh, he can do it in Spain and Holland, but Italy's a different proposition, and also Italy. The Italian kind of Serie A was the best league in the world at that time, one of the best players, and Italians, they pride themselves on defending. So they see this guy come over and they think, oh, we'll stop him. We'll do it. But it didn't quite pan out for the defenders, did it, mate?
No, exactly what you say. Again, it's like another challenge for him. He's done it in Holland. He's done it in Spain. But as you say, Italy was the best league in the world at that time. Best players, best coaches, highest paid. But also Italian football had that reputation for being defensive. Like, it's probably one of the few countries in world football where the defenders were probably the heroes, and if you could keep a clean sheet and win 1-0 and have all the dark arts and stuff, then fans loved it, didn't they?
Yeah.
But again, he goes there, and I think in his first season it's 34 goals in all competitions, something like that. Again, incredible sort of record. And I mean, they won the UEFA Cup in that year as well. They played Lazio in the final, and Ronaldo scores a typical Ronaldo goal. He gets put through and one-on-one with Marchigiani, and it's hard to describe, but he just almost like twists his body back and forth a little bit, sort of, drops his shoulder, and the keeper just goes on his arse, basically, and just goes around and finishes. But it's done at like 100 miles an hour. But in that moment, he needs to deceive the keeper. It's almost like it slows down. It's incredible and great season. And I think, if you'd stopped time then and said to an Inter fan, what's going to happen for the next few years, they would have thought, we're going to dominate now. We've got the best player in the world. Again, they just missed out on the league. They had there's a really controversial episode with Juventus where I think it was 3 or 4 games from the end, and they were quite neck and neck almost. And Ronaldo gets fouled in the box, and doesn't get given the penalty. And then they're all complaining. The ball goes up the other end. I can't remember who it was for Juve. It might have been Del Piero was fouled. Ref gives a pen. Anyway, they miss it, but they end up winning the game. And everyone Inter was like absolutely livid at that, and thought that Juve were getting favoured by the referees. And obviously, 10 years later or whatever, the Calciopoli scandal hits, and Juventus have been uncovered doing some dodgy things, should we say? But yeah, I mean that kind of, again, had that gone their way, they might have won the league. And I almost feel sorry for him in a way that, like you said before, he did have an amazing career, and a lot of people do look at it as a bit like, what if, I mean, his career was probably better than 99% of people's careers, but yeah, it could have even been better, had he had a little bit more luck with certain teams at, certain times, and obviously the injuries. But that was another season, like with Barcelona the season before, where they could have easily won the league, and no one would have batted an eyelid really, and he was at the forefront of it. But obviously we can talk about the World Cup, but that was it really, is it for him at Inter. He was there for another 4 years after that, and it was just not a very happy 4 years for him.
No. I mean, you talk about that UEFA Cup final. That was one of the great Ronaldo performances. Not just the goal; he was just completely unplayable in a game where it was thought that it was going to be tight margins, and Inter absolutely smashed them, didn't they? Absolutely smashed Lazio.
It's funny. I watched the whole game back recently because I did a podcast just on that game, and actually Lazio played quite well. They dominate the ball for large portions of the game, but Inter were just, Inter just had the quality. They had Zamorano, who scored. Zanetti scored a brilliant goal as well, and they just had that kind of threat all the time. And obviously Ronaldo was, he didn't touch the, he didn't touch the ball millions of times in that game. I think it was something like 20 something touches, but every time he touched it, he either went past someone or he drew a foul. So he ended up getting a player sent off. He got a player booked, and he ran Nesta ragged as well, and Nesta was like one of the best defenders in the world at the time. Yeah. And Nesta said after the game, he just said he was unstoppable. And he said, I watched it back to see what I could have done better, and just it's nothing you can do because he's that good. And it's high praise indeed coming from a top defender like him. And that was when UEFA Cup, I think, was pretty much at its peak as well. When you had all those strong teams, not as many teams going in the Champions League until like later on when you had 3 or 4. So you still had really strong teams in that cup, and they won it. They won it pretty comfortably in the end. So it was. I would say that if you ask Inter fans, they would probably say that's his best performance. And also in the semi-final, they played Spartak Moscow, and the pitch was like the worst pitch you've ever seen, and he turned it on then as well, scored an amazing goal. And there's little compilations on YouTube, like 2-minute where it just shows every touch from that game, and he's just he's just unbelievable, brilliant.
Yeah, as you know, as a coach, mate, if you've got a player who gives you 20 touches like that in a game, he's in every week, isn't he?
Absolutely.
That's certain. So we'll move on. Yeah, the 97-98 season was great, and then we go into the ill-fated 98 World Cup, and the Brazil side. They were good, but I think they were fragile as well. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I think when you look back, like they weren't great. I mean, they had a couple of big names there, Cafu and Ronaldo, obviously, but Romario had been left out late on because he was injured, and Romario was probably someone. I was on a podcast with Tim Vickery the other week, and he was saying, he's probably not the person you want to be locked up with for sort of 6-7 weeks in a training camp, in like a World Cup camp, which is fair. But also, I think for Ronaldo's point of view, Romario not being there kind of almost heaped all of the pressure on his shoulders, and he was the main attacking threat. If you fast forward to 2002, you've got Rivaldo, you've got Ronaldinho, world class players by his side in a front three. Whereas in '98 it was him really. I mean, Danielson was one of the big stars, but he was only a kid as well, and and he went to Betis for big money, but never really fulfilled his potential. So it was kind of almost all on his shoulders, and yeah, I mean, he did all right up until the final and the semi-final against Netherlands. He scored a brilliant goal through Van der Sar's legs, and I think he was on 4 goals at that point. So not a bad tournament, from a personal point of view. But everyone just always remembers the final, and rightly so, really, because it is possibly one of the most infamous moments in World Cup history. I can't think of many more that would top it for kind of intrigue.
No, there's been lots of rumours that have surrounded it, but we've never really been given a definitive answer of what happened that day, have we? Although there's
there's loads of daft rumours going around, like that he was poisoned, or like the chefs at the hotel poisoned him, or Nike forced him to play, and I think it's all been rubbish, really. He was carrying a bit of an injury. That's kind of pretty much a fact that he was carrying an injury. Again, another one of the theories is that they tried to give him some sort of dodgy pain-killing injection and it went into the wrong vein or something. And it's all been kind of rubbish, really. And the overall consensus is really that there was a lot of pressure on him, and he just had like a fit, like a seizure, really. What's weird is that it never happened before and it never happened after. And he played in some big games. It's not. It is weird that it never happened again, but I think sometimes you just have to say it is what it is. It's not there doesn't always have to be as good as it is from sort of script writing material. There doesn't always have to be like this disastrous Hollywood kind of reason.
Conspiracy theory.
I think it might. It was just exhaustion and pressure, and yeah, obviously the pressure for Brazil to perform, him maybe carrying a bit of a knock, and he'd kind of built it up in his head that he was going to be the man to win Brazil's. It was a big thing for Brazil to win their 5th World Cup. It was a really big thing back home, and when they finally did it in 2002, it was like a massive deal. Again, Brazil's just different, I think, in football. Like a lot of other countries, they'll go to a World Cup, and if they get to the semi-final or they lose the final, I mean, same with us with England under Southgate. It's kind of like. Oh, we've done well. I kind of agree with that, because only one team can win it. But in Brazil, it's almost like you win it or you're a loser. It's just a different kind of mentality they've got around the national team. It's just different. It's not that it's that right, or other teams are wrong for not demanding the win, but that's just how it is in Brazil. And I think that pressure just told. So yeah, that's it, really. And then obviously, again, you come to the final, and it's one of those things that had Ronaldo been fully fit, France might still have won, because France had a good team. France were, really riding the wave of that home World Cup. They had a multicultural, young, exciting squad that got more popular at home as the tournament went on, and they might have won anyway. They had Zidane. Zidane was obviously a world-class player, and I think it's unfair sometimes that people just focus completely on Ronaldo, as if that Ronaldo being fit or not was the determining factor. When had he been 100% fit, they might still have lost. So So yeah, that's what I think about that final, really.
Yeah, I mean, there was some pretty loose Brazilian defending, wasn't there? And there's nothing he would have been able to do to affect that. So yeah. So moving forward, I mean, so it was he was then at Real. Oh no, he joined Real in 2002.
Yeah, so there's still 4 years between to come, but I mean, it was 4 years to forget, really. He had 2 massive injuries, 2 massive knee injuries. The first one that he got was November '99. It looked quite innocuous. He sort of went up for a header, and then as he came down, he must have just jarred his knee or something. So he walks off the pitch, and it's seemingly quite innocuous, but it's not. He ends up needing an operation, and takes him 6 months to come, 5-6 months to come back. He's playing Lazio, and in April 2000 it was, and within something like 5 minutes of his comeback, he just collapses on the floor. There's pictures, and there's pictures on the floor where he's in agony, and you can just sort of see his knee. He's like, his kneecap is sort of not where you want your kneecap to be. Yeah. And I mean, even all the players around him, like the opposition players, there's a couple of people there, like Simeone, who he'd played with at Inter, and the opposition physios and everything. Like everyone in the crowd was almost because obviously he was an opposition player, but I think he was still, people respected him and liked him, I think, across Italy, even though he was the opposition player. And, you know, the whole crowd and everyone around the stadium, I think, was sort of feeling for him, you know, after his comeback. And so that was April 2000, and then didn't really have that much action for Inter throughout them 4 years, really. There's spells, obviously, where he comes back and he's playing a small run of games, but it doesn't really happen for him. And then just before the World Cup, Hector Cooper, the Argentinian disciplinarian, was the manager, didn't get on at all, which was a sort of theme throughout his career, that, you know, when he had a manager that didn't treat him almost, not with kid gloves, but, you know, really, if you've got a player like that, you should be giving him a little bit of leeway, you know, like.
Yeah. You don't put the harness on, do you? You just let them roam free a little bit.
Yeah, and the managers that did that to him, he just didn't vibe with. Whereas the ones that kind of gave him a little bit of leeway, like Bobby Robson and Del Bosque at Real Madrid and Simone at Inter, he thrived there. You know, he kind of needed that love and that freedom. But people like Hector Cooper just killed him. You know, day after games, he's making him do 8K runs as a warm down kind of thing, and it just wasn't him. You know, so that's kind of the backdrop to then what ends up being the 2002 World Cup, which is his sort of redemption story, and probably arguably one of the greatest sporting comeback stories of all time, really.
Yeah, I mean, it was he must have gone into that with a feeling of unfinished business there. And I do remember when he went into that tournament, there was still he's not fully fit. He's not, you know, he's not the player that he used to be, but he confound. Yeah, this is the reduced Ronaldo, as we say, like the Ronaldo after 2002. But it didn't pan out that way. I'm sure everyone knows the story, but tell it for us again, because it's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, people were still not sure, you know, before the World Cup, like, is he going to be, because he hadn't really played a lot. You know, he'd had spells where he was away from Inter, he'd gone back to Brazil where he was, you know, recuperating, probably with the odd party thrown in there as well. And yeah, no, people weren't sure. There was no guarantees that he was going to be fit enough to do what he did. I mean, no one could have foreseen that he would do what he did at that tournament. But yeah, he scored in an early game against China, and it's quite an acrobatic goal, really. It was crossed in from the left, I think, and he sort of jumps up and almost like a scissor kick in the air. And he said after that goal, I feel like I'm all right because I've done quite an acrobatic goal. I've come down quite heavy, and I'm back almost. And you know, he scored quite a few goals in that tournament, and then came to the Turkey game, and he was carrying a knock. He had a knock on the inside of one of his thighs, sort of the muscle there, and I think showing his maturity, instead of you know, panicking and thinking back to the previous tournament when he'd had a bit of a knock as well, he shaved his head in that funny way, if you remember, with a triangle at the front of his head. And he said since that he wanted to distract people, you know, and all over the news was like, well, look at the state of this haircut, and kids across Brazil were copying him, and mums across Brazil were you know,
tearing their hair out.
Yeah, like, oh god, look what he's made our kids do. Look at this daft haircut. But he wanted to stop people talking about his injury, and probably with a view to the final, thinking I don't want people to be talking about '98, and it kind of worked to a certain degree. And then in that game, he talking to toe pokes as well. He scored a toe poke, but he said he did it like that because he couldn't kick properly because of his thigh, so he had to sort of improvise. And I think if you watch that goal back, it's quite a way out for a toe poke, but again, it just sort of deceives the keeper a bit, and yeah, then it's the final, and you know, the rest is history, I guess. It's 2 goals against Oliver Kahn, who was named the best player of the tournament. A bit weird looking back that they named the player of the tournament before the final. I mean, it makes no sense, that, because if you did it all over again, you'd say Ronaldo. But Oliver Kahn, he conceded like 1 goal in 7 games, I think it was, before the final. And he was obviously a top keeper. And then, you know, Ronaldo scores 2 against the best keeper in the world, and you know, tears of joy at the end. And that's like 4 years of hurt, you know, because of the injuries, but also because of the '98 World Cup final. But another thing that I found out about that 2002 final was that, you know, in '98, as was his ritual, really, you know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd have lunch, or they'd been training and they'd had some lunch, and he'd go and have a nap. But because of what happened to him in '98, he refused to do that, and he just stayed awake. And I think he was just pestering people in the hotel, trying to get people to play table tennis with him or whatever. And probably should have been resting, but was just had all that energy and just didn't want to sleep. And I think probably also shows that he's just a bit more relaxed and a bit more mature. But yeah, I mean, what a story. That documentary that was on DAZN a few months ago, like absolutely incredible filmmaking, just showing the kind of the sheer relief and emotion that he went through was incredible.
Yeah, it is an amazing story, but it also poses quite a interesting question. It's a question that I've asked other people who've got interest in other countries. Like, I mean, there's always been that search for the new Maradona for Argentina. That cycle's come to an end with Messi to a certain degree, but also like Gerd Muller, the West German centre forward. Germany have never really found an answer for that number 9's slot. Would you say that that's the same with Ronaldo, isn't it? Brazil have never really replaced Ronaldo.
Yeah, no, they haven't, have they? I mean, Adriano was there for a bit. I think football's changed a little bit, hasn't it? I mean, I was reading an article the other day, just nothing to do with this, but just about the lack of number 9s, and we said at the start, he wasn't like a traditional number 9 when he first started, but everyone, R9, everyone just associates him as a centre forward, and you just don't really get centre forwards anymore, do you? I think, you look at someone like Neymar, who's been one of the biggest stars since Ronaldo retired, and he's not a number 9, and I think the game's changed a little bit, really. But yeah, obviously, people will still look for that next, the next big thing, whether that's the next Ronaldo or the next Pele or whatever. But yeah, I think they've got some good players, Brazil, haven't they? But yeah, I don't think any of them are, whether they end up being as good as him, whether they'll have the same kind of, people will have the same kind of affinity with them. I would probably argue they won't, really. Even Vinicius Junior is a good player. I'm not a big fan of Neymar. You've got other players like Richarlison knocking around the national team. He's not great. So yeah, I don't think they'll ever fill those shoes.
No, we live in the era of the interchangeable front three, don't we? So
yeah, exactly.
The number 9's guy. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Dan. So can you let everyone know where can they get their hands on this fantastic book?
So you can get it from me direct if you want a signed copy. I've got a specific Twitter account for the book as well, which is @Ronaldo Book. So quite a simple one. Or the usual places: Amazon, Waterstones. There's loads of places anywhere online, really. So yeah, you'd loads of places to get it. But happy for people to come direct to me if they want a signed copy as well.
Oh, that's great, Dan. It's been fantastic talking to you, mate. Thanks for sparing your time and being a guest on the show.
Yeah,
so guys,
cheers, Phil.
You're very welcome, mate. So we'll see you next time on Football Geeks, everyone, for more incisive football chat from our roster of fantastic guests. Bye for now, guys.